My name is Ryan Walker, and if you're going to understand what I did, and what I almost threw away, you have to start with Emily, long before she was my wife. She grew up in one of those Midwestern towns that barely shows up on a map. One stoplight, one diner, one main road that pointed toward places everyone talked about but almost nobody reached. Her dad poured concrete until his back gave out. Her mom hemmed dresses at the kitchen table, the sewing machine rattling over the evening news. College wasn't expected there. It was a rumor. Emily told me once about the day everything shifted for her. She was 13, hanging around the clinic parking lot waiting for her mom, when some guy staggered in holding his chest. People froze, someone yelled for the doctor, and the neighborhood GP sprinted out in sneakers and a faded polo. No cape, no drama. Just calm hands, clipped orders, a woman counting compressions, an ambulance called with zero panic in his voice. The man lived. When she told me that story years later, her eyes went distant like she was replaying it. It wasn't magic, she said. He just knew what to do, and everyone listened. For her, that wasn't a cool memory. It branded itself into her head as a job description. From there, her life narrowed into a straight line. No lake trips, no house parties in someone's dad's barn. While other kids drank warm beer in pickup beds, Emily sat at her bedroom desk under a buzzing lamp, hunched over textbooks with sticky notes like battle plans. If she was going to make it out, she'd have to work twice as hard with half the margin for error. That was the math she lived by. When the acceptance letter came from a top medical school, she didn't scream. She just sat on the edge of her bed and cried quiet, tired tears. Later, she told me she wasn't crying because she got in. She was crying because now there was no excuse not to go. Her town threw her a potluck in the church basement. Crockpots, paper plates, people pressing cash into her hand like they were buying a ticket on her future. Old ladies hugged her. Men she barely knew slapped her dad on the back like he'd personally built the ladder she was climbing. It didn't feel like a goodbye, she said. It felt like they were loading every hope they had onto one girl's shoulders and watching to see if she'd break. By the time I met Emily Carter on a campus 3 states away, she was already carrying all of that. I just didn't know it yet. By the time I met her, I was fluent in one language. Numbers. Revenue projections, market gaps, case studies. Feelings were something you managed just enough to keep the machine running. It was a Tuesday, early fall. The kind of day where the campus looked like a brochure. Leaves starting to turn, kids in hoodies pretending they weren't already behind. I just left a business class where we'd spent an hour arguing about whether a terrible idea could be saved with good marketing. I got in line at the campus coffee stand, already drafting an email in my head. The line was brutal. 20 deep, one overworked barista, espresso machine hissing like it was mad at all of us. I made some throwaway comment to the girl in front of me about how we'd probably graduate before we got our drinks. She turned, and that was Emily Carter. She wasn't flashy. Ponytail, tired eyes, sweatshirt with the med school logo, a stack of flashcards in her hand like she didn't trust herself to waste even 10 minutes. But there was this alertness in her face, like she was running triage on her own life. The coffee has better odds than some of my patients, she said, deadpan. I laughed. Rough morning. Rough semester, she answered, then slipped one flashcard back, another forward. Anatomy exam Friday. If I fail, I'll personally be responsible for the downfall of an entire Midwestern town. That got my attention. I told her I was a business major, that my biggest problem this week was a group project where half my team thought deadline was more of a suggestion. She smirked. So your patients are lazy 20-year-olds? Exactly, I said. They're not responding to treatment. The line inched. Our conversation didn't. She told me bits and pieces. Split shifts in the lab, professors who spoke in abbreviations, the constant fear of being the weak link. I told her about startup ideas I scribbled in notebooks, the way I watched markets for fun, how I planned my life 5 years out like a spreadsheet. We were opposites on paper. She was color-coded notes, highlighted lectures, a town's expectations humming in the background. It was easy jokes, big picture plans, and the kind of lightness you develop when no one back home is betting their future on your shoulders. What I didn't know then was that she envied that lightness. What she didn't know was that I was tired of people who treated ambition like a personality trait. Our nice to meet you could have ended at the register. Instead, we bumped into each other again 2 days later. Same coffee stand, same exhausted barista. I waved my drink at her. See? We survived. She rolled her eyes, but she stepped into my orbit like it was the most natural thing in the world. Quick chats turned into a pattern. Coffee before her labs. Coffee after my classes. Then one day I said, I have a finance quiz. You have a brain that scares me. Want to study? We ended up at a corner table in the library. She spread out her notes with surgical precision. I pretended to review mine while watching the way she underlined key phrases, lips moving just enough to trace the words. It was like watching someone sharpen a blade. Study sessions became a standing thing. Then came dinners off campus when we could both admit we were exhausted and didn't want to talk about school for an hour. Somewhere between cheap pasta and shared fries, the future stopped being my plan and her plan and started sounding a lot like we. For her, I wasn't a distraction from medicine. I was the first person who made the grind feel survivable. For me, Emily was proof that you could be dead serious about your work without turning into a hard, joyless person. Neither of us said it out loud then, but that's the day our lives hooked into each other and didn't let go. Not yet. Not for a long time. We graduated into a life that, on paper, looked clean and earned. She became Dr. Emily Walker. I was just Ryan at the office, but I was moving fast. Promotions, better titles, meetings where people actually listened when I talked. We had a small wedding that felt bigger than it was. Her parents crying like they just watched her cross the finish line of a 20-year race. My family proud in a quieter, less dramatic way. We weren't rich, but we weren't scrambling. For two kids who'd climbed out of different corners of nowhere, that mattered. Our first apartment was nothing special. Thin walls, questionable plumbing, noisy neighbors. But it was ours. We split bills, argued about grocery brands, laughed about the couple downstairs who fought loud enough to shake the ceiling. We had a couch, a bed, and a shared idea that hard work plus love equaled security. Then residency started. Her schedule turned into a series of hits. Nights, weekends, 24-hour shifts that left her walking into the apartment with the hollow, wired look of someone who'd seen too much and slept too little. My job, meanwhile, demanded late nights, travel, just one more meeting, with people who thought burnout was a badge of honor. At first, we treated the chaos like a team sport. We texted stupid memes between shifts, left notes on the counter, crashed into bed at odd hours and wrapped around each other like that made up for everything. But slowly the slides started. Date nights became, we'll do it next week. Next week became, once this rotation is over. Conversations shortened. Less, how are you? And more, what time are you home? Or, can you grab milk? The calendar on the fridge turned into a coordination chart for two overbooked coworkers sharing a lease. I noticed the distance. I'm not going to lie and say I was oblivious. I just misdiagnosed it. I told myself this was what driven people went through, that this was the price of building something real. I kept believing that once we got through this imaginary future checkpoint, her residency, me at a certain salary, things would settle down. What I didn't see was that our marriage wasn't holding steady. It was running on momentum, and nobody was touching the wheel. There's no warning label on the moment your life starts tipping over. Most of the time, it looks like a normal Tuesday. For Emily, it started with a gym membership. She picked a place near the hospital, one of those glass front buildings with two bright lights and people who take their warm-up more seriously than most people take their marriage. She mentioned it over breakfast once, half a sentence between sips of coffee and a check of her schedule. I'm gonna start hitting the gym between shifts. Clear my head a little. I nodded, scrolling my email. Yeah, that's good. You've been stressed. That was the beginning and the end of the conversation. No questions, no follow-up. Just another item I mentally filed under she's handling it. Tyler Grant was already in her orbit before I ever knew his name. Charismatic surgeon, sharp technically, louder than he had to be. The kind of guy who walked into a room like it had been waiting on him. I'd heard about him in passing. Stories from Emily, jokes from Jason, hospital gossip that framed him as equal parts brilliant and exhausting. I didn't think about him twice. At the hospital, he was just another attending she rotated with. At the gym, he became something else. Familiar. She told me later how it started. He spotted her on a treadmill across the room, did a double take, and wandered over with that easy grin. Walker, do you actually exist outside Scrubs? She laughed because it was easier than rolling her eyes. He made a crack about the hospital, about how residents were basically cheap, overeducated labor, then asked how she was holding up. Not how many hours did you log? Or did you chart everything? Just how she was. Harmless stuff. A joke. A compliment about her discipline. A good to see a friendly face off duty. She was exhausted. I'd been treating her like a co-founder in a startup instead of a wife. He was there, available, and very good at making people feel temporarily less invisible. From where I stand now, I can see exactly what was happening. A woman starving for real attention, and a man who treated attention like a game he'd already mastered. Back then, all I saw was a line on our joint bank statement for a gym I never asked about. The line she crossed didn't start the night she cheated. It started the day she realized it was easier to talk to him than to come home and try to talk to me. The night my marriage went over the edge didn't start with a scream. It started with a text. I was at home, laptop open, half watching numbers crawl across a spreadsheet. Emily was finishing a shift that had already run long. She sent the first message. Emily, hey, can we actually talk tonight? Like really talk. I glanced at it, hands still on the keyboard. Me swamped. Maybe tomorrow? There was a pause. Then, Emily, it's important, Ryan. I'm tired of feeling like a roommate. That one hit a nerve I didn't want to look at. Instead of asking what she meant, I went defensive. Me, I'm working my ass off for us. I don't have time for drama. I watched the 3 dots appear, disappear, appear again. When her reply came, it was shorter. Emily, it's not a drama. It's our marriage. I felt cornered, even though I was sitting alone at our own kitchen table. So I did what a lot of men do when they don't want to admit they're scared. They get mean in small, efficient ways. Me, if you're that unhappy, maybe go clear your head at the gym. I knew exactly what I was doing with that line. I was throwing her routine back in her face, making it sound like the problem was hers to manage. A neat little way of saying, I'm fine. You're the issue. Her answer, Emily, wow. Got it. Then nothing. I stared at the screen, waiting for more. When it didn't come, I convinced myself I just set a boundary, closed the messages, went back to my laptop, told myself she was being overly emotional and that we'd sort it out when things calmed down. Here's what I know now, from the pieces she gave me later. She finished her shift wound tight and hollow. She read my last message in the locker room, sitting on a bench with her phone in her hand and that ugly fluorescent light washing everything out. She could have gone home. She could have pushed, called, forced the conversation. Instead, she drove to the gym. She walked in angry, tired, and alone in a way I hadn't bothered to see. Tyler was there. Of course he was already mid-workout, already turned up. He spotted her, waved her over, and asked if she was okay with a tone that sounded like the question I dodged. He cracked jokes, made space for her to talk, let her vent about the fight without ever asking for both sides. Then he laid down the kind of line that walks in wearing concern and leaves wearing something else. You deserve someone who really sees you, Em. Not a hand on her arm. Not some grand gesture. Just that sentence, said to a woman whose husband had basically told her to take her feelings to the treadmill. After the workout, they didn't part ways in the parking lot. She knew what she was doing when she walked toward his car. She knew it when she got in. There's no point pretending otherwise. I won't give you details. I don't need them and I don't want them. It's enough to say that somewhere in this city, while I sat in our bed telling myself she'd picked up an extra chart or a late case, my wife stepped over a line you don't get to step back from. That night, I turned off the light, rolled over in an empty bed, and thought, we'll talk tomorrow. By then, the version of our marriage I believed in didn't exist anymore. The weeks after that night looked normal from the outside. That's the sick part. Emily came home. She showered more, I remember that. Long showers, water running while she sat on the edge of the tub, trying not to look in the mirror. She moved around the house like a ghost on a schedule, cooking sometimes, folding laundry, asking me about my day with a voice that sounded careful. I knew something was off. I told myself it was just the fight, just residency, just everything. We'll be fine. I thought like that was a plan. The truth came at me from a different direction. Jason Reed had been my friend since before Emily. We'd done the broke student thing together, then the young professional thing. He worked admin side at the same hospital where Emily and Tyler floated around playing God. Hospitals run on caffeine, protocols, and gossip. Tyler, being who he was, didn't keep his mouth shut. Started with jokes. Comments about late-night cardio that weren't about the treadmill. A nurse catching a look. Someone seeing them leave together one too many times. Rumors snowballed. Names got attached. Details sharpened. Jason heard enough to connect it to me. He called one afternoon while I was at my desk, staring at a quarterly report that suddenly didn't matter. "Hey man," he started, but his voice was wrong, too careful. "You got a minute?" I stepped into a conference room. "What's up?" Silence. I could hear him breathing. "Ryan, I need to tell you something. And I swear to you, I wish I didn't know it." He laid it out. Not everything, but enough. Tyler, the gym, people talking, the timing, the way they'd been seen. He didn't embellish. He didn't soften it either. My body went still. Not shaking, not yelling. Just calm. Like the seconds before a car hits you. "You sure?" I asked. "I wouldn't be making this call if I wasn't," he said. "I'm your friend first. That's why you're hearing it from me and not from a stranger." We got off the phone. I stood there in that conference room with the lights too bright and the walls too white, and I knew there was only one person who could either fix this or finish it. I called Emily. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey," she said, voice soft, like nothing was wrong. "Did you sleep with him?" I asked. No hello. No lead-in. Just that. Silence. A long breath. "Yes," she said. No story. No spin. "No, it's complicated." Just one word that cracked something clean in my chest. My hand tightened around the phone. For a second I thought I might throw it. Instead I just said, "Okay," and hung up. I drove home on autopilot. I walked into the house that still smelled like our life, went to the kitchen drawer, pulled out a notepad. I didn't pour my heart out. I wrote one sentence. "I'm leaving. Don't call me." I packed a bag with enough to get through a few weeks. Clothes, laptop, toothbrush. I walked out without slamming the door because I didn't want to give the moment that much drama. The truth is, I left because I couldn't figure out how to stay and still look at myself like a man in the mirror. This is where the story stops being clean, if it ever was. A few weeks after I walked out, Emily found out she was pregnant. I wasn't there. The way I know it now is how she told me later. Early morning, bathroom light too bright, cheap plastic test on the sink, 2 lines staring back at her like a verdict. She sat on the edge of the bed we used to share and did the math. Dates. Shifts. That night. Me. Him. It didn't take long. She decided it was mine and never moved off that decision. When she called, I was in a furnished apartment that looked like a catalog for men who'd given up on personality. I answered because habit beat anger by half a second. "I'm pregnant," she said. No warm-up, no apology stapled to the front of it. "The timing fits. It's yours, Ryan." I went quiet, not because I didn't believe her, but because believing her meant facing everything I was trying to outrun. "You sure?" I asked. "Yes." There was a beat where I could have said a lot of things. I picked the coward's version of honesty. "I don't know what to do with that," I said, and then I got off the phone. She didn't call again. From there, my knowledge of her pregnancy is secondhand. She shifted her schedule, took the lighter rotations she could get away with, dealt with the same gossip machine that had chewed through us, now with a growing belly and no husband in sight. At night, when the house was quiet, she took an old spiral notebook from the kitchen drawer and started writing. Fears, appointments, names, small details she didn't want to lose. Months later, she gave birth to a baby boy with my face. Dark hair like mine, same eyes, same stupid stubborn chin. She named him Ryan Walker Jr. without hesitation. No DNA test. No hedge. Just faith in the man who'd walked away. I kept my distance and told myself it was principle. In reality, I went to work, came home, lay in a strange bed, and scrolled through her social media in the dark, watching blurry photos of a life I was too proud and too scared to step back into. 7 months after he was born, I met my son in a dark auditorium full of people pretending not to be bored. There was a medical conference in the city, lectures, panels, the usual parade of slides and acronyms. I almost skipped it. Long week, no real reason to go. Habit 1. I showed up late, slipped in with a small wave of suits and scrubs. The room was dim, projector humming, some specialist droning about outcomes on the stage. I scanned the rows, looking for an empty seat, and then I saw her. Emily sat midway down, hair pulled back, posture relaxed in a way I didn't recognize. There was a baby asleep on her shoulder, small hand fisted in her blouse. She looked older by a year and by a lifetime, like someone who'd stopped waiting for their life to go back to before and just started living with the scar. She turned, eyes tracking the movement, and saw me. That look, there was no drama in it, just a steady acknowledgement. There you are. Here I am. This is where we ended up. My gaze dropped to the kid. You hear people say, I knew right away. Sounds cheesy until it happens to you. His face was mine. Features softened, miniaturized, but impossible to talk around. My chest locked up, like my body understood before my head could catch up. After the session, people spilled into the hallway in a low roar of chatter. I walked toward her, every step heavier than it should have been. Emily, I said. She turned fully, adjusting the baby on her hip. I looked at him, really looked. Then I heard myself say, he's my son. She didn't flinch. You can see for yourself, she answered, and stepped just enough aside that I could move closer. We met later that week in a small cafe 2 blocks from the hospital. No lawyers, no witnesses. Just coffee going lukewarm between us and a stroller at our feet. I want a DNA test, I said. Not because I don't believe you. Because if I do this, I don't want my brain inventing escape hatches later. She held my stare, then nodded once. Okay, Ryan, let's take away all your excuses. Her calm shook me more than any begging or screaming ever could have. The envelope showed up like any other piece of mail. No dramatic courier, no thunder in the background. Just paper on a table with my name on it and a weight that had nothing to do with its size. I knew what it was before I opened it. Clinic logo in the corner. My signature on the consent form. The numbers I'd demanded because my pride needed hard data more than my heart needed peace. I tore it open anyway. There it was in black and white. Probability of paternity 99.99%. No wiggle room. No back door. No interpretation. Ryan Walker Jr. was my son. You'd expect some big moment. Dropping to my knees, tears, whatever people put in movies. That's not how it went. My first reaction was a slow, cold wave of course he is, followed by a punch of shame so clean it almost felt like relief. I doubted what I already knew because it was easier than admitting I'd run. I sat there at my cheap apartment table, the same one I'd eaten takeout on alone for months, and stared at that paper until the words blurred. Then I folded it, slid it back in the envelope, and realized I had officially run out of excuses. So I did the one thing left. I went to see my son. The first time I knocked on Emily's door after the results, I felt more like a stranger than a husband. I stood there holding a jumbo pack of diapers because I didn't know what else to bring. Flowers would have been pathetic. Toys felt premature. Diapers were useful, neutral. She opened the door in leggings and an oversized shirt, hair pulled up, dark circles under her eyes. Motherhood hadn't made her softer. It had made her stripped down, efficient. Hey, I said. Hey, she answered. We stood there for a second, both aware of all the things that weren't being said. I'm here to see him, I finally managed. She nodded once and stepped aside. No speech, no guilt trip, no forced warmth. Just a simple, okay, come in. The house was small but lived in. A drying rack with tiny clothes, bottles lined up by the sink, a folded blanket on the back of the couch. It was the life I should have been part of, with all my edges missing from it. He was a bouncer in the living room, half dozing, half staring at nothing with that blank baby seriousness. Dark hair, my eyes, my jaw, just starting to shape itself on his tiny face. "Hey, RJ," Emily murmured, scooping him up. "Daddy's here." The word hit me harder than the DNA percentage. She handed him over like it was the most normal thing in the world, but I could see her watching my hands, my posture, checking if I would flinch. I didn't. I was awkward as hell. Sure, but I held him. He stared up at me, unfocused, like he was trying to decide what I was. I looked back and thought, you're the one thing in this mess that didn't do anything wrong. I brought diapers, I said, because my brain is a comedy show at bad moments. Good, she replied. We go through those like water. We didn't dig into the past. Not that day. Conversation stayed surface level, his feeding schedule, his sleep patterns, how she was juggling shifts. I stayed for an hour, then 2, then found myself leaving only because it felt like I should. Not because I wanted to. That became the pattern. At first, I told myself I was coming just for him. It made it sound noble, like I was rising above the wreck instead of crawling back through it. I'd show up with groceries, formula, wipes. Hold him, change him, walk him around the room when he cries. But you can't keep it clean like that. Life doesn't respect the lines you draw in your head. Between bottle warmings and diaper changes, there were small, quiet moments with Emily. She'd hand me a clean onesie while I tried not to fumble a screaming kid. I'd fix a leaky faucet while she put him down for a nap. She'd leave coffee on the table next to me without comment. I'd wash the dishes without being asked. No apologies. No grand speeches. Just 2 people moving through the same space again, doing practical things for a small person who didn't care about our history. Time did its work. I started staying longer. Sometimes I'd show up and she'd be half asleep on the couch, and I'd take the baby and tell her to go lie down. She stopped checking the clock when I was there. I stopped feeling like I needed a reason beyond that. They're my family. We talked, eventually, in counseling, in the kitchen, in short bursts when the baby was quiet. We didn't dance around what she'd done. We didn't pretend the affair was a mistake that just happened. She owned it. I owned the way I'd been gone long before I packed a bag. I put boundaries on the table. Phones open, late nights explained. No second chances if that line got crossed again. She didn't argue. She put her own boundaries down too. About my temper, my tendency to disappear into work when things got hard. I didn't argue either. Rebuilding didn't feel romantic. Felt like rehab. Slow. Awkward. Necessary. One day, my bag wasn't by the door anymore. My clothes were back in the closet. My toothbrush was in the bathroom with hers. We hadn't decided it in a single conversation. We just moved in that direction one small step at a time. On my birthday, she cooked. Nothing dramatic: pasta, garlic bread, a store-bought cake with Dad written in slightly crooked blue icing. RJ was old enough to toddle now, unsteady on his feet but determined, like he had something to prove. After dinner, Emily wiped his hands and slipped a little box into them. "Take this to Daddy," she said. He waddled over, concentrating hard, tongue sticking out a bit like the mission required full effort. He shoved the box into my chest and then yelled something that might have been, "Duh!" Might have been nonsense. It didn't matter. I opened it. Inside was a simple leather keychain. Dark brown, worn-looking even though it was new. One word pressed into the leather: family. No last name. No date. No quote. Just that. I turned it over in my fingers, feeling the weight of it. Keys are commitment. You don't put them on something unless you mean to carry it every day. "That's not the gift," Emily said quietly. I looked up. "The gift is what we rebuilt," she finished. "This just reminds you." There were a lot of things I could have said. I didn't say any of them. I just nodded once because anything more felt like it would cheapen it. Here's what I know now. Forgiveness didn't erase what happened. It didn't scrub the timeline clean. There are still nights when I look at her and remember the phone call, the word Yes. The note I left on the counter. But the scar is part of the story now, not the whole thing. So every morning, when I grab my keys and feel that strip of leather in my hand, I get the same reminder. You chose this, not the pain that came free. You chose to stay. You chose to come back. You chose to be a father, a husband, a man who doesn't run when it's easier than rebuilding. And every day I have the same answer. I clip the keys to my belt, kiss my son on the head, nod at my wife, and walk out the door knowing I'll come home. Not because it's perfect, because it's ours.
Subscribe and stay one step ahead of cheaters. And trust me, the next story makes this one look like a fairy tale.